Okay, hi, I'm Josh, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about drug addiction. So, we're going to go over some misconceptions, some facts, some resources, just to, inform, illuminate, you know, the basics. Okay, let's get started. The first thing we need to do when we're talking about drug addiction is kind of delineate what addiction is, because the word addiction is something we use very casually in conversation and colloquially, but it is something incredibly serious. So, just because you say like, "Oh, I'm addicted to this new series," or "I'm addicted to this food," that's not true. We're using that term incorrectly, and that can be damaging. So let's just start there. So addiction is a dependence on a substance or behavior for normal physical and psychological functioning. Addiction is a disease. It's not it's not just a problem people have to work through. It's a disease that kind of infuses into every aspect and facet of their life, and it's incredibly serious. It's life changing. So let's just be cognizant of the way we use our words because they can be hurtful. Okay, next. So the next thing we want to just go over is some common misconceptions. So the first one is something that I've seen in probably the majority of pieces of popular media that have to do with drug addiction, and that's that the idea that drug addiction is indicative of some character flaw or character weakness within the person that's using those drugs. Um, and that's just not true. Drug addiction says nothing about the person except that they're a victim of these really powerful and addictive drugs. Um, the next one, demonization of drug addicts, is something I've seen constantly. For some reason, the media loves to paint drug addicts as the bad guy, when really they're victims just as much as anyone else. The third one, this isn't a misconception, more is just like something I've seen a huge amount of, and it's ignorance of socio-political factors. People that talk about a lot of the articles that I've read about drug addiction kind of talk about it as though it happens in a vacuum, that the only thing that's causing this addiction is either the drug or the person, when in reality, our society has a huge impact on whether or not we're using drugs, whether we're addicted to drugs, whether we even have access to drugs. So, be cognizant of that. And also, the last one is ignorance of treatments. And I think that's really important to talk about now because our justice system, criminalizes drugs, and then the treatment for that is prison when that's not a treatment for drug addiction in any way. Drug addiction can only be helped through rehabilitation, support groups, constant checkups, not just locking someone up and throwing away the key. Okay, so the causes of substance abuse. The first big category I want to talk about is genetics. So, uh, believe it or not, drug addiction can be, actually, no, not can be, is hereditary. You can inherit genetic factors that make you more likely and more susceptible to drug addiction. And these genes mostly have to do with your stress response and your reward system. So, like, the parts of our brain that are dealing with stressors and different things, and also the parts of our brain that are dealing with our dopamine release, like our reward system, because that's kind of the avenue through which addiction occurs. And this gene right here, dopamine transporter DAT SLC6A3 gene, that's just there because that's one of the most. It was what was studied in one of the most clearly delineated studies that I found. And obviously, dopamine. It's one of the. It's your most common reward system neurotransmitter. Okay, so obviously we talked about your genetics have something to do with um, your likelihood of developing drug addictions, substance abuse disorders. But that's not really useful for us to know now. That's useful in the future. Like all information is useful, all knowledge is important. But to actualize that information, we can't really do it because the way that we would have to address these problems is through very expensive very singular gene therapies and gene modifications, and that's just not something that like is a current treatment right now. So this information, while important, is less currently useful than this information. So a huge impact on whether or not you become a drug addict, whether or not you have access to drugs in the first place, is your environment. And anything that affects your emotional state, anything that affects your friends, your mental health, um, any of that can affect whether or not you seek drugs as a coping mechanism. But social factors like racial inequalities, poverty, those affect your access to drugs. And then the number one most important thing that will affect whether or not you become a drug addict is your support system. Whether or not you feel supported by your family, whether or not you feel that you have support by your friends. So if you feel unconnected, untethered, then you're more likely than anyone else to seek these kind of self medications. And it's sad. Okay, let's talk about treatments now, because that was kind of depressing. So there are a ton of different ways you can treat drug addiction. I can think of like 6 right off the top of my head. There's, cold turkey, you can take antagonistic drugs. There's various like homeopathic remedies. But the most important thing I think to like see about treatments for drug addiction is that you need to seek assistance. I'm not saying you can't do it alone, but it's very unlikely you're going to be successful alone. So, seek people, seek help. Rehabilitation is a great option for, a lot of people. If it's not an option for you, there are groups, religious groups like AA, Celebrate Recovery. There's also, go to the community center, talk to people. You can find someone, and also the most important, obviously, your family. And that doesn't just include blood, also like your found family, like friends. Tell them that you're having a problem and help them. And no, tell them that you're having a problem and let them help you. Okay, and these are just some resources. The most important one that I would probably focus on is this National Substance Abuse Hotline, because what they're gonna do, obviously, they're gonna answer, and they're gonna give you more local resources because I don't know where you live. And this is for people that are actively suffering from drug addiction. It's not a guide to like addressing drug addiction, but it has tips. It has more resources, um, and it's just good. It's a good amount of information that I think people need. And these, okay, if you want to, I'm not saying you have to donate to either of these, but if you want to donate to someone, I would recommend donating to either of these two. They're great. Okay, and these are my sources. So, thank you for sharing this time with me, and thank you for listening. And remember, no one's alone. Everyone has someone. Everyone can get better. So, bye.